Today, we're talking all about Homestead Systems. This is a follow-up from my first course, my mindset shift course, from overwhelmed to empowered. I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on some of the topics that I discussed in that course, and I also want to talk about systems and how important they are to your homestead. This is a little bit of a long one, but stick around and let's get into it. When people first start thinking about homesteading, it's exciting, right? Maybe you grew up around it. Maybe you have family and friends that already live this lifestyle. Maybe you started watching videos online, you know, those funny farm videos, the cute baby goat videos, all the fresh garden harvests, a woman breaking sourdough bread in a linen apron while soft music plays in the background. And of course, we've all seen Karen the emu. Dangerous, yes. Funny, yes. Somewhere along the way, something starts pulling at you. You start thinking, I want that life. I want that garden. I want the animals. I want to live a slower life. I want to learn how to do all these things for myself. And you want to feel more connected to your food, your land, and your life. And honestly, that's a beautiful thing. But then something happens that almost all beginners do without realizing it. You start comparing. You start watching how everyone else does things. And at first, it feels productive. You think that you're learning, and you are learning, but unintentionally, you're also collecting expectations. You see a beautiful organized garden, harvest baskets that are overflowing with produce, pantries that are lined with home canned goods, and happy, healthy animals. Maybe handmade fences or coops, thriving orchards, and adorable baby animals that never seem to be covered in poop online. And it's inspiring, right? And it really is. There's absolutely nothing wrong with learning from others. But here's the part that people don't talk about enough. You're usually seeing the snapshots, the highlights, the best lived moments, not the everyday maintenance of this lifestyle. Not hauling water in 5-degree weather because everything's froze, fixing the fences in the dark after work, trying to keep all the animals cool and not die in 110-degree weather. Coming home after a 10 to 12-hour shift and still having chores waiting for you is stressful. Trying to cook dinner simultaneously while the goat is screaming at you from across the property, because let's be real, they're always screaming about something. And that's the real side of homesteading. But that's the things that we don't see online. But that's where systems come into play, and that's why they matter the most. Let's get into it. What even is a system? So before we go any further, we should probably break down a little bit more by what I mean by systems. Because I think people hear the word systems and immediately picture complicated schedules, spreadsheets, color-coded binders, maybe a whiteboard, military-level organization, and that's not what I mean. A system is simply the way you repeatedly do something, and that's it. Your morning animal routine, that's a system. How you water your garden, that's a system. Where you keep your feed buckets, your tools, a system. What order do you do your chores in? System. How do you preserve your food during the harvest season? System. Every homestead runs on systems, whether people realize it or not. Some systems are intentional and some are accidental. Some work really, really well, and some are held together by zip ties, caffeine, and pure survival instinct, but they're still systems. And the reason systems matter so much is because homesteading is not a one-time event. It's daily repetition. Animals need care every single day. The garden needs maintenance every day. Food prep, watering, feeding, cleaning, repairs, over and over and over again. So if your systems make life harder instead of easier, burnout comes incredibly fast. And that's exactly where a lot of homesteaders start struggling. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is trying to copy someone else's homestead exactly. And honestly, I understand why, because when you're new, you assume, well, if it works for them, then it's going to work for me too. But here's the problem. Every homestead exists under completely different circumstances, right? We all live in different climates. We have different schedules, different land, finances, health situations, family dynamics are going to be different. We all have different energy levels, and we are all in different seasons of our life. So what works for someone else may not work completely for you. Someone that stays home full time, their systems are not going to match up and align with someone that works 40 to 50 hours a week. What works on 30 acres may not work in a suburban backyard, and what works for a healthy 25-year-old may not work for someone that's managing chronic pain on a daily basis, right? What works for a homeschooling family may not work for a family constantly driving kids back and forth to school, sports, and events, appointments, and all the activities. And honestly, some people online simply have way more help than they're willing to admit. And that's great for them. But when you try forcing someone else's systems into your life, you usually don't end up feeling inspired. You end up feeling behind. You start thinking, why can't I keep up? Why does everyone else seem more organized? Why does this feel so much harder for me? But the problem isn't you. The problem is a system that you copied that wasn't built for your life. And this is where a lot of people start burning out, and they start thinking that they can't do certain things because they keep trying harder instead of just adjusting the system that they put in place. And one of the biggest traps in homesteading is believing that complicated automatically means better. Especially in the beginning, you get motivated, you get excited, and suddenly you're creating a detailed chore charts that are color-coded, complicated feeding schedules, giant garden plans, spreadsheets, calendars, 12 different homestead goals at the same time. And honestly, it looks great on paper, right? I'm sure it looked amazing. And for about a week, you probably showed up for it. Then you got tired, work got busy, maybe the kids got sick, it rained for 4 days straight. Who knows? Maybe the dog got out. Your plants start collapsing, you forget half your list, and suddenly the system that looked perfect completely falls apart because complicated systems require a lot of mental energy to maintain. Simple systems survive much longer. Simple systems look like checking the garden while you're drinking your morning cup of coffee, feeding the animals at the same time every single evening, collecting eggs during another chore that you're already outside doing, turning the compost while you're bringing scraps out. It's little routines that are attached to what you're already doing in your day-to-day life. Those are systems that tend to actually stick. And honestly, the best homestead systems are usually kind of boring. They're repeatable, they're manageable, and they're sustainable. They're not impressive, but if your entire setup only works when you're fully motivated, when you're well rested, perfectly organized, and when life is all peaceful and calm, it's probably not that strong of a system because real life is messy. Shit happens, and your systems need to be able to survive real life. If you watch my first course, you've probably already heard me say progress over perfection. But on a homestead, that becomes really, really important because if you wait for perfection before starting anything, you're never going to start. And honestly, most homesteads evolve slowly over years. They're not overnight. Your first garden probably won't be perfect. I know mine wasn't. Your first coop setup may change 6 different times. Mine's probably been 10. Your compost pile might literally just start as that corner over there, and mine still is. And that's okay. Because good systems usually develop through experience, inconvenience, mistakes, frustration, and repeatedly asking yourself, there's got to be a better way to do this. And that's how sustainable systems are born. Not from perfection, from adjustment. Every season you notice things like what wastes your time, what creates more stress, what makes chores harder, what flows naturally, what keeps falling apart, and slowly you refine things, and that's normal. Honestly, most functional homesteads are just years of small improvements stacked together. They're not perfection, and they never started that way. What are the most important questions you can ask yourself is, will I realistically be doing this 6 months from now? Not this week, not while you're motivated, not when you're super excited about it, 6 months from now. Because motivation is temporary, especially when it's freezing outside, chores are piling up, life feels overwhelming, or you're just plain old tired. And honestly, some days you will not feel like doing any of it. That's real life. So instead of asking, what's the best system, ask, what's the simplest system I can realistically maintain? And maybe that's something like fewer animals, a smaller garden, simplifying routines, automating certain chores, lowering your expectations during busy seasons. And that's not failure, that's sustainability. This lifestyle is not a sprint. It's something you're trying to live, not survive. So before we move on to the next section, I want you to pause and think about something. What homesteads are you currently comparing yourself to? What systems are you trying to replicate? And more importantly, do those systems actually fit your life right now? because the goal here is not to build somebody else's homestead. The goal is to build one that supports you, your lifestyle, and your goals. Now I want to talk about tracking your homestead without it turning into a full-time office job. One thing that happens to a lot of people when they first start homesteading is suddenly feeling like they need to absolutely track everything. And part of that comes from watching experienced homesteaders online. You see people with beautiful garden journals, color-coded binders, detailed spreadsheets, freezer inventories, planting calendars, breeding records, feed charts, preservation logs, and pretty soon you're sitting there thinking, okay, apparently I need a farm accountant now too. So beginners start tracking everything. They track their egg counts, their feed usage, planting dates, how much they're harvesting, expenses, rainfall, temperatures, growth rates, freezer inventory, pantry inventory, probably the emotional state of their tomato plants. And listen, tracking can be absolutely helpful, and I do recommend it in certain cases, but trying to track too much and all at once and too early gets you overwhelmed really quickly, because suddenly instead of helping your homestead, your tracking systems becomes more of another chore that you want to avoid. And that defeats the whole purpose of tracking. The real purpose of tracking isn't to be perfect. Tracking simply helps you notice patterns, helps you make better decisions over time, and that's it. Not every single thing needs to be documented like a scientific research project. Most of us are just trying to remember whether or not if we already fed the chickens today. The first question I want you to be asking yourself is, what information is actually going to be useful to me right now? Because not all the information is going to matter equally. Some tracking generally helps you make better decisions. For example, tracking egg production so you can help notice health issues or seasonal changes in your flock. Tracking planting days helps you learn what grows well in your climate, what struggles, what pests are showing up, what timing works best. Tracking feed helps you understand monthly costs. But here is when people start getting stuck, is because they try tracking everything at once, and eventually that systems become too complicated to maintain consistently. They stop using it entirely. A simple system you actually use is going to be way more valuable than a perfect system that you abandon after 2 weeks because it was pretty and color-coded. So instead of trying to create the world's most organized homestead binder immediately, start small, pick a few things that truly matter in your current season. That's enough, because tracking should support your homestead, not take over your life. I do have a lot of free resources on my website. I even made a whole chicken binder. There's a homestead binder, and it's not meant for you to use every page. It's meant for you to pick and choose what works well for your life right now and your goals. If that's something you're interested in, you can check out the link down below. I'll make sure I leave it, and it's all free. Print it as many times as you need to, and only use what's actually gonna work well and supplement your life. Don't think that you have to fill out every single page. If you raise animals, keeping simple notes can honestly save you a lot of stress later. And again, simple matters way more than fancy. You do not need complicated spreadsheets, giant charts, 12 apps, laminated farm records, a filing cabinet labeled chickens emotions. A notebook works just fine, or a little app in your phone. The goal is consistency, not perfection. Once again, I'll say it over and over and over. Animal logs can include things like, egg production, certain health changes, feed changes, breeding dates, medical treatments, hatch dates, or weird behavior. Simply something feels off. Even tiny notes can become valuable later. For example, egg production dropped this week. I switched feed brands. I thought the goat was acting weird. Duck decided chaos was a personality for the day. Those little observations help you identify patterns later, because when something changes suddenly, you actually have reference points. And honestly, a lot of experienced homesteaders aren't necessarily remembering everything perfectly. They've just learned how important quick, simple notes can be, especially when you have multiple animals and life gets busy, because eventually all the days start blending together, and suddenly you're standing there wondering, wait, when did I last deworm the pigs? When did I do that? Simple notes can help you solve problems fast. Me personally, I like to use my notes app. I keep it to write things down that like I need to do around the property. Like, oh, I need to fix that fence, but I don't have to do it right now, but I just need to do it soon. Or like the weeds in this bed need to be pulled soon. Like I make a mental note of all these things I need to do. And if I notice the animals are acting off, or like maybe I think one of them are going into heat, I will actually write that down in my calendar just so that I can go back and look into it. I also do that with medications as well, or obviously for birth records. Those kinds of things are important to incubation too. You need to know when your birds are hatching. Now, let's talk about the mystery of missing food. Another area where tracking does become really helpful is for food storage, especially if one of your goals is to be self-sufficient in that aspect of your life. Because once you start growing and preserving your own food, things can escalate super quickly. Like your freezers fill up, your pantry shelves get crowded, jars start disappearing behind other jars, you find mystery freezer bags from 3 years ago that nobody knows how to identify anymore, and suddenly you realize that you have actually no idea how much food you have that's stored, and that is an amazing problem to have. But it is really common with homesteaders to not be super organized. I'll admit that my food organization could be a little bit better. I mean, I know what I have and where I have it, but how much I have necessarily, I don't. Like in my freezers are just, I have to bounce from freezer to freezer to look for things sometimes. That's why even the super basic food inventory system can help so much. And again, it doesn't have to be complicated. It can literally just be like a notebook paper list, a dry erase board, a sticky note on the freezer, a simple list on your phone. That would be enough. Just enough so you have like an awareness of what you do have, what you're low on, and what needs to be used first, and what you probably don't need to grow 47 pounds of again this year. So for example, you have 10 jars of tomato sauce, 5 frozen bags of green beans. You're out of broth. Too much zucchini. Again, imagine that. That information becomes really useful over time because eventually you start noticing patterns, how much food your family actually uses, what preservation methods work best for you and your family, what crops are worth growing more of this season, and what crops nobody actually ate despite your optimistic gardening plans. That awareness can help you reduce a lot of waste. Now, I'm talking about all these different tracking methods and what you could track, what you should track, but then I'm also telling you that tracking can become stressful. So let's talk about when it becomes too stressful and when it's not worth it. So tracking should make your life easier, not more stressful. And if the tracking system starts feeling overwhelming, exhausting, it's hard to maintain, or guilt-inducing, that's usually a sign the system needs to be simplified. It's not that you failed. Some seasons of life are just busier than others, and sometimes that's work getting overwhelming, family responsibilities increase, health struggles happen, the garden explodes with harvest that you just weren't ready for. Maybe life just feels heavy for a while, and during those seasons, it's completely okay to scale back. Maybe you only track the essentials, maybe you stop updating certain logs temporarily, maybe your freezer inventory becomes there's food in there somewhere, and that's okay because your family still has something to eat. The goal of tracking is awareness, not complete control. You do not need to document every single detail of your homestead to be successful. Some of the best homestead systems are the most flexible ones that help you survive difficult seasons, and that matters way more than perfection. Like I had said earlier, I don't track a whole lot of things. I track the most necessary things that I have to, but everyone's goals are going to be a little bit different, and that's what I wanted to talk about here because tracking can be helpful to track your goals and to make sure you're moving forward, to make sure that you got enough food, to make sure that your chickens are healthy, that your animals are healthy, that everyone's getting the medications or the health maintenance that they need. There are times when tracking is necessary, but it should never become so overwhelming that it stresses you out. So as you continue building your own homestead systems, I want you to think about this. What information actually would help your life run smoother? Not what looks impressive, not what you want to tell people, not what someone online tracks. What information generally would help you make better decisions on your homestead? Because awareness creates better systems, and better systems create less overwhelm over time. And that's what we're going for, right? No one wants to be overwhelmed. Now we're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic, budgeting. Because when most people hear the word budget, they immediately picture spreadsheets and restriction, guilt, financial stress, and someone on the internet telling them they can never buy their iced coffee again. That approach never works. It doesn't work in homesteading, and it doesn't work in regular everyday life either. Homesteads are not predictable, and life isn't either, honestly. Some months you are buying seeds and soil, chicks and fencing, irrigation supplies, and other months everything suddenly breaks all at once for no reason. And if you have animals, there's always something that you need to buy, right? You have their feed, you have their medications, their minerals, their vet care, their maintenance for their houses, the random, how did you even manage this situations? Homesteading can have a lot of fluctuating expenses, which is why a rigid traditional budgeting system never works. It just gets really frustrating because you start looking at your spending thinking, why is this month so much more expensive? Meanwhile, the answer is, well, the goat broke out and the water line exploded, and apparently we needed 17 bags of feed this month, and that's real life. And I think a lot of people quietly feel guilty because their finances don't look consistent on paper month to month. Excuse me, but homestead life moves in cycles, and that's normal. So instead of viewing budgeting as control and restriction, I want you to start reviewing it as awareness and rhythm, because awareness helps you make better decisions without constantly feeling like you're failing. Traditional budgets are usually designed around stable, predictable lifestyles. It's the same bills, the same expenses, same categories every single month. Homesteading does not work like that because homesteads naturally have seasonal expenses, fluctuating priorities, emergency repairs. There's always something, right? And then we have the weather. The weather does whatever it wants to. We have our infrastructure projects, the season harvest, the animal costs, and random surprise expenses that always show up at the worst possible time. But that unpredictability can make people feel like they're bad at budgeting. But usually the problem isn't the person. The problem is trying to force that rigid budgeting style onto a lifestyle that naturally fluctuates. So, for example, spring often gets expensive fast. You're buying seeds, soil, stars, irrigation supplies, new animals, fencing, materials, garden tools. Then summer might bring water costs, maybe some repairs, preservation supplies, harvest equipment, shade cloths for the animals. And fall is feed storage, canning supplies, freezer prep, winterizing projects. And winter is heating costs, maybe some more repairs. There's always repairs in there somewhere. Planning for next season, how the feed disappeared so quickly, having to get more hay. Homesteading naturally operates in cycles, and once you understand that, budgeting starts feeling a lot less personal. You can stop thinking that you're failing and start thinking that, okay, this is just a season that I'm in right now, and now I know I need to save for it better. And that shift can really help you understand mentally how your budgeting system works in cycles and how to better prepare for it. One of the biggest mindset shifts that helped me personally was learning to think seasonally instead of monthly, because monthly budgeting alone can feel incredibly discouraging on a homestead, especially during expensive seasons, or if you are trying to sell things from your homestead, you have to put money in before you get money out, right? But when you zoom out and look at the whole year perspective, you can start seeing patterns start to appear. You realize certain expenses always happen in the spring, certain repairs show up before winter, feed costs increase during specific seasons. Garden spending isn't constant year-round, and suddenly your spending starts to make a lot more sense. You're no longer surprised by predictable seasonal expenses, and you start preparing for them. And preparing removes so much of that stress. Not all of it, obviously, because animals still enjoy creating financial emergencies for sport, apparently, but a little preparation can go a long way. And another important thing is that not every homestead season is production focused, right? Some seasons are more maintenance, some are recovery, some are planning, and some are just plain survival. Sometimes they're learning lessons too. And that's normal as well. The homestead year naturally ebbs and flows, and your finances will too. Every homestead has reoccurring expenses. Feed is usually one of the biggest, and feed costs can sneak up on people fast, especially when animals are starting to grow so quickly, the prices increase, winter hits, and somehow you accidentally end up with more animals than you originally planned. Oh, how'd that happen? Which happens pretty much to everyone, right? Right? Then you have the supplies, you have the fencing, the bedding, the waterers, the tools, the replacement parts, random hardware store trips that somehow cost $100 every single time. And then you have your surprise cost, because eventually animals do get sick, equipment breaks, weather does its thing and breaks things, pipes freeze, predators happen, fences fail at the worst possible moment. But that's just part of our homesteading life. One of the most freeing mindset shifts is simply expecting that unwanted expenses will happen, not making a big deal out them, not panicking every single time. Just understanding that this is part of maintaining a homestead or life in general. Stop viewing things as a surprise expense and failure. It becomes much more emotionally easy to adapt and to move forward. No, we don't want these things to happen, but understanding and accepting that they will and being prepared for it helps you deal with it when it does happen. This may be one of the most important mindset shifts in this entire section, because budgeting is not about punishment, and it's not about guilt. It's not about obsessively controlling every single dollar, and it's definitely not about making yourself miserable. Budgeting is just really paying attention. It's about awareness, because awareness helps you make better decisions, right? Helps you ask better questions. Instead of am I allowed to spend this money? You start asking, does this support the systems that I'm building? Does this support the lifestyle I'm building? And that's a very different mindset. For example, buying better watering system can save you time, energy, stress, and crop loss later, right? Repairing fencing might prevent much bigger problems. Buying proper storage containers might protect food you worked really hard to preserve. Those aren't random wasteful purchases. Those are investments into systems that will support your life. Sometimes spending money strategically actually reduces overwhelm long term, especially for busy people trying to build sustainable systems, because the goal is not perfect financial control. The goal is building a homestead life that's sustainable financially, mentally, physically, and emotionally over time. So as you think about budgeting moving forward, I want you to stop asking yourself, how do I budget perfectly? And I want you to start asking, how do I build financial awareness so that it supports my real life? Because budgeting on a homestead isn't really about perfection. It's about learning your patterns, preparing for seasons, and building systems that make life feel more manageable over time. It's not rigid, it's not perfect, it's just sustainable. We've been talking about systems this whole entire video so far. Now I want to talk about seasonal systems, because we want to work with the seasons of the year and not fight them. And it's really easy to get overwhelmed on a homestead expecting everything to operate the same all year long, and nature doesn't work that way. Everything in nature moves in cycles. There are seasons of growth, seasons of harvest, seasons of preparation, and seasons of rest. But people often approach homesteading thinking they should be constantly building something, expanding, producing, improving, organizing, accomplishing all year long. And when that doesn't happen, they feel like they're behind. If the garden isn't producing yet, they feel like it's unproductive. If the garden's slow, if the winter season is slow, then they feel like they're being lazy. If summer becomes survival mode, they feel like they're disorganized. I think social media makes this worse too, because online, it always looks like someone is harvesting something beautiful somewhere. Meanwhile, in real life, you're outside in sweatpants in the middle of November just trying to emotionally survive while carrying buckets down to the animals. And that's okay too. That's normal. Homesteading gets so much easier mentally when you stop fighting the natural rhythms of the year. Homesteading shifts during the seasons. Spring feels different than winter. Summer feels different than fall. And your energy, your priority, your workload, your systems, your goals, those should fit with the seasons of the year. And that's one big shift that I want everyone to realize, is not every season is meant for productivity. You know, spring can be meant for building, planting, preparing, expanding. Everything gets exciting again. You're buying seeds, starting projects, planting your gardens, probably overcommitting slightly, because spring is all about optimism, and it's incredibly powerful. But then summer hits and it becomes maintenance season. It's like smoldering hot, so you're watering everything, you're constantly weeding, you're not even harvesting yet, and you're just trying to keep everything alive. And then everything starts coming to fruition and you start harvesting, and then you have way too many zucchinis and you don't know what to do with all of them. So now you're trying to figure out how to store everything, how to wash everything, if you have time for everything. The summer can get really busy, right? And everything shifts into fall and you're trying to make sure everything is preserved so it lasts over winter. You're storing, you're filling your freezers, you got winter prep coming, you got to get the animals ready, you got to get irrigation and the sprinklers situated, you gotta winterize your house, the whole property. Then winter arrives and everything naturally slows down. Not because you're failing, but that's just literally what nature does. Then winter becomes more like planning and repairing, organizing, resting, learning, reflecting. And once you start expecting those shifts, you stop feeling guilty for not producing at maximum speed all year long. And that can mentally change the way you see your homesteading years. Another really important thing to understand is this: not every season of life allows you to do everything either. Some seasons are just harder. Work gets busy, the kids need more from you, health struggles happen, family emergencies happen. Sometimes life just feels heavy for a while, and this is where people accidentally overwhelm themselves. Because instead of adjusting their expectations, they keep trying to operate at full capacity anyways. That usually leads straight to burnout. This is why light systems matter so much. Light systems are basically your bare minimum survival mode systems. They're routines that keep your homestead just functioning, even during the really hard seasons. Things like feeding the animals, checking their waters, basic garden maintenance, preserving what you already grew, and maintaining the essentials. Not expanding, not starting 10 new projects, not rebuilding the entire property while you're emotionally collapsing inside. Just maintaining the stability. And sometimes stability is the accomplishment, because that matters. Social media often celebrates growth, expansion, productivity, but sustainable homesteading also requires knowing when to maintain instead of expand. And that's wisdom, it's not failure. Now let's talk about preparing ahead instead of feeling like you're always having to catch up. Because a lot of times on the homestead, we'll feel like we're behind. You know, we plant too late, preserve food after it's already piling up, fix systems only after they're failing, winterize after freezing temperatures already arrive. And we've all done that, right? You tell yourself that you still have time, then suddenly the tomatoes are exploding, the freezer's already full, the jars are still dirty, the weather's changed overnight again, and now you're stress canning at 11 p.m., questioning your life choices. Small preparation ahead of time prevents so much chaos later. Things like prepping the garden beds before you need to plant in them, organizing your preservation supplies before you're harvesting, cleaning your freezers out before you're filling them, stocking the feed before the weather goes bad. Tiny preparations like this can create a huge relief for later. Prepared systems make you feel calmer. It's not always perfect, but it just helps you deal with it in a calmer way, I guess you could say. Nobody likes reacting to the emergencies after the fact. And no, you won't always stay ahead, but that's just real life. But even a little bit of preparation can help remove that overwhelm and anxiety you get from feeling like you're falling behind. This next part might be one of the most important lessons of this whole course. Rest is part of sustainability, and I don't think people hear that enough anymore, because in nature, rest is built into the systems. Fields get rest, plants go dormant, animals slow down, the soil recovers. Nature does not constantly produce every second of the year, and neither should you. But a lot of people feel guilty anytime they slow down. And I'm still learning this for myself, because there's always something that feels like it needs to be done. Always another project you could be working on, another improvement, another thing needing fixed. And if you aren't careful, that mindset will absolutely exhaust you. So sometimes part of the homestead needs to rest. Maybe a garden just needs to sit empty for a season, and that's okay. Projects can be postponed, expansion pauses, winter becomes a maintenance season instead of a production season, and that's okay. Some of the healthiest homesteads are the ones that know when to pause. Because rest is not laziness, rest is recovery, and recovery is what allows sustainability long term. Homesteading should support your life, not consume every ounce of energy you have to give, because this lifestyle is meant to be yours, and it's not just about doing it until it burns you out. So as you continue building your homestead, I want you to stop asking, why can't I keep up all the time? And instead ask, what season am I actually in right now? Because once you start working with the natural rhythm of the year instead of fighting it, everything starts feeling a little bit more manageable. Not because it's easy, but it's steadier, and that matters more. No matter how organized your homestead becomes, life is still going to happen. I think this is part of homesteading content completely skips over, because people love talking about the productivity, the routines, the goals, the growth, the expansion, but real life includes illness, it includes exhaustion, grief, stress, family emergencies, burnout, overtime at work, bad weather, mental health struggles, and seasons where you barely feel like you're keeping your head above water. And that's real life. And your homestead exists inside your real life, not separate from it, which means there will be weeks where chores happen late, weeds take over, dishes pile up, projects get abandoned halfway through, and you suddenly realize the laundry has emotionally evolved into a giant mountain. That doesn't mean you failed. It just means that you're human. One of the healthiest things you can do is to stop building systems that only work during your best weeks, because life is not made up of only best weeks, right? The strongest homestead systems are the ones that still function during the hardest seasons. Not perfect, just functionally. What matters, and that matters way more. One of the biggest mindset shifts in homesteading is realizing that the goal is not eliminating chaos, but learning to exist among it, because chaos is just a part of this lifestyle sometimes. Animals escape, water lines freeze, storms are going to happen, schedules change, people get sick, life gets messy, and you cannot build a homestead that never experiences problems. What you can do is build systems that help things keep functioning when problems happen. And that's the difference. Strong systems don't rely on perfect motivation, perfect energy, perfect weather, perfect schedules, or the perfect mental health. They rely on simplicity and priorities. The goal is not everything always looking perfect. The goal is the most important things are still taken care of. And those are very different goals. And honestly, I think a lot of homesteaders need permission to stop treating every unfinished task like a failure, because maintaining stability during difficult seasons is success. The next thing I want to talk about is knowing what needs to be dropped first, trying to figure out where everything lines up in your list of priorities, especially when life gets overwhelming and there's so much that needs to get done and you feel like it all needs to get done. Realizing and knowing that it doesn't, or at least knowing what has to be done first, can be super helpful. I already said earlier in the video how I like to keep notes in my phone. So I keep a list of things. It's like, okay, I know that this, and this needs to be done. It helps me stay on track, but it also helps me prioritize things. So if there's a safety issue that's concerning, I obviously know that that needs to be fixed, but the weeds can wait. It helps me emotionally stay stable, especially if I'm not feeling up to it, if I'm stressed out, if I'm working overtime or just got other things going on. Knowing that not everything has to be done, but being able to be like, okay, well, the animals have to be fed, the pasture has to be watered, I have to fix this fence, and everything else can wait. Because honestly, everything in the garden will still continue to grow. I mean, eventually those weeds will have to be pulled, but it doesn't have to be done right now. It can wait. And protecting your energy is productive. Exhaustion helps nobody. Not you, not your family, not your animals, not your homestead. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is intentionally not do certain things. And it's not necessarily laziness, that's wisdom, because you need to be able to protect your energy, and your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Every homesteader goes through seasons where things fall out of rhythm. Every single one, no exceptions. It doesn't matter how much experience they have. There's going to be times when the weeds get ahead, the chores happen later than normal or not at all, systems stop flowing smoothly, projects are going to pile up, routines disappear for a while, and it's very easy to feel discouraged after those seasons happen because your brain starts focusing on things that fell apart instead of everything that continued to run without you. But here's something really important. Restarting is much easier than starting from scratch because the systems that you had already built before, they still exist. You already learned the skills. You already know your routines. You already understand what works and what doesn't. So you're not starting from zero. You're just rebuilding the momentum. And momentum almost always returns through small actions, not giant overhauls. You know, feed the animals, walk the garden, turn the compost, wash the jars, reset the space. Tiny actions matter because small, consistent movements rebuild rhythm surprisingly fast. And honestly, one bad week does not erase all the progress you made before it. Neither does one bad month. Homesteading is not about never falling behind. It's about learning how to return without drowning in guilt every time life gets messy. And that's a huge difference emotionally. The most sustainable homesteads are not the ones that are rigid. They're the most flexible ones. I think this applies to people too. Rigid systems usually work great up until life changes unexpectedly. Then everything collapses because the system only worked under ideal conditions. Flexible systems are different. Flexible systems allow for slower weeks, lower energy seasons, changing priorities, adjustments, temporary scaling back. For example, maybe one year you grow less food. Maybe you delay getting more animals. Maybe projects get postponed. And that's okay because the goal of homesteading is not constantly doing more. It's not trying to get everything done as quickly as possible. The goal is building a life that's sustainable long term for you and your family. This is where sustainable systems become really important because sometimes surviving the season is the accomplishment. A homestead that bends will almost always outlast one that's constantly operating on maximum capacity because systems create resilience, not perfection, and resilience matters way more in the long run. There's one thing I hope you take away from this course. It's this. Homesteading should support your life, not consume it. Your systems should help reduce overwhelm, not create more of it. And you do not need perfect routines, perfect gardens, perfect schedules, perfect productivity, or a Pinterest perfect homestead to build a meaningful life closer to the land, closer to your food source. You just need systems that fit your life, your energy, your season, your reality, because sustainable homesteading isn't built through perfection. It's built through rhythms, habits, adjustments, a lot of grace, and continuing to come back even when life gets messy. And that's always going to be enough.